The key turned in the lock with a sound that was both foreign and deeply familiar, a metallic sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. Erica Adams paused her aimless scrolling on the couch, her heart performing a peculiar, hopeful stutter against her ribs. She had been waiting for this moment, rehearsing it in her mind for days, yet now that it had arrived, a sudden shyness gripped her. The door swung open and there she was, haloed by the harsh Los Angeles afternoon sun, Chloe. Her sister stood on the threshold, a silhouette of exhaustion and uprooted life. A single oversized suitcase, scuffed at the corners, rested beside her like a tired pet. In that first unguarded moment, before Chloe's social mask could snap into place, Erica saw it all. The faint tracks of dried tears through foundation, the slump of shoulders that had once carried the invincible posture of an older sibling, the hollowed look in eyes that were the same shade of hazel as her own. This was not the glamorous, sharp-edged Chloe who had left for a Phoenix wedding 3 years prior, all champagne dreams and designer luggage. This was a woman returned, shipwrecked by a divorce she never saw coming. Erica rose, the soft blanket falling from her lap. "You're here," she said, the words too simple for the flood of emotion they released. Chloe managed a fragile smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. The prodigal sister returns. Suitcase and all. The next minutes were a quiet ballet of awkwardness and ingrained habit. Erica helped haul the suitcase over the lip of the doorway, its surprising heaviness a tangible testament to a collapsed marriage. The apartment, Erica's modest one-bedroom sanctuary in Silver Lake, suddenly felt both too small and immensely important. This was her space, all clean lines and potted succulents, about to be shared with a living ghost from her past. As Chloe shrugged off her jacket, Erica was ambushed by a memory so vivid it stole her breath. They were children in their parents' backyard, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and honeysuckle. Chloe, ever the fearless architect, was directing the construction of an elaborate pillow fought from couch cushions and old sheets. Erica, the loyal lieutenant, followed orders, her small hands struggling to tie knots. Chloe had promised it would be a castle, a place where no boys or bedtime rules could ever intrude. For a few golden hours it was. "I put fresh sheets on the bed in the spare room," Erica said, shaking off the memory. "It's not huge, but the light is nice in the mornings." "Anything is huge compared to the guest room at Mom and Dad's," Chloe replied, her voice tinged with a weariness that spoke of prolonged scrutiny. "Thank you for this, really." The spare room was Erica's office, a place of spreadsheets and marketing analytics. She had spent the weekend clearing a path, boxing up her printer, moving her filing cabinet to a corner. The single bed now looked both inviting and forlorn. Chloe set her suitcase down with a final thud, her gaze sweeping the room, taking in the evidence of her sister's displaced life. A flicker of something guilt perhaps passed over her face. "I'm sorry about the intrusion," Chloe murmured, running a hand over the crisp floral duvet cover. "Don't be," Erica said, perhaps too quickly. "It's not an intrusion. It's good to have you back." The words hung between them, charged with unspoken history. Their bond, once as fundamental as shared DNA, had frayed over distance and differing lives. Chloe's whirlwind romance and move to Arizona had been followed by a gradual radio silence, conversations shrinking to obligatory holiday calls and text messages that grew increasingly sparse. The divorce announcement 6 weeks ago had been a shock, delivered in a brittle 2-minute phone call. Erica had offered the spare room immediately, a lifeline thrown across the chasm, hoping it might also be a bridge. They unpacked in a comfortable, if somber, silence. Chloe's belongings seemed sparse for a life dismantled. Folded sweaters that still smelled of an unfamiliar detergent, a few books, a small jewelry box that remained closed. Erica watched her sister place a framed photograph on the nightstand, a picture of the two of them as teenagers, arms slung around each other's shoulders, squinting into a sun that belonged to a different era. The sight of it, this deliberate curation of a happier past, filled Erica with a fierce, protective hope. Maybe this was their chance. A terrible reset button had been pressed in Chloe's life, and here in this sun-dappled room they could start anew. They could reclaim the easiness of their childhood, the secret language of sisters, the solidarity against the world. Erica could help her heal, and in doing so, perhaps mend the rift that had quietly grown between them. The shadows under Chloe's eyes, the defensive hunch of her posture, these were just wounds, Erica told herself. Wounds could heal, as the last sweater was tucked into a drawer, a tentative peace settled in the room. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, painting warm stripes on the floor. For the first time since Chloe's arrival, the silence felt gentle, not strained. Erica felt a swell of optimism, bright and buoyant. This was her sister home. Whatever had happened in Phoenix, they could face it together. The past was a prologue, and this, the opening of a new chapter, was filled with the quiet, hopeful promise of reconciliation. The fortress they built now would be stronger. The hopeful peace of Chloe's arrival proved as fragile as the morning mist over the Los Angeles basin, burning away under the relentless sun of passing weeks. Erica's initial optimism began to curdle, not with a sudden shock, but through a slow, insidious drip of oddities that pooled in the quiet corners of their shared life. The sister she remembered, even in her distant, pre-divorce grandeur, had been many things: dramatic, ambitious, occasionally self-absorbed, but she had never been furtive. This new Chloe, the one occupying her spare room, was becoming a creature of shadows and whispers. It began with the phone. Chloe was perpetually attached to the device, its glow a constant halo on her face in the dim living room evenings. But it was the manner of its use that set Erica's nerves on edge. A message would chime, a low and urgent sound, and Chloe's entire body would tense. Her eyes would dart to Erica, a quick, assessing glance before she would murmur an excuse and retreat, to the balcony, the bathroom, the far end of the hallway. Behind half-closed doors, Erica would catch the low, urgent murmur of conversations, the cadence sharp and secretive, never the relaxed laughter of a chat with an old friend. When she'd return, her expression would be carefully smoothed into neutrality, but a faint flush often lingered on her neck, and her hands would be restless, twisting a ring or tucking the same strand of hair behind her ear. Then small things began to vanish. It was easy to dismiss at first. A silver picture frame from the bookshelf, one holding a photo of their parents, a jade paperweight Erica had bought on a trip to Monterey, a set of good kitchen shears. Household objects with minor monetary but personal value, dissolving into the apartment's atmosphere. Erica would search, blaming her own forgetfulness, only to find the items days later in odd places, the paperweight tucked behind the couch cushions, the shears at the bottom of a grocery bag. Each rediscovery felt less like a relief and more like a violation, a subtle rearranging of her space by an unseen hand. The most unsettling shift was in Chloe's defensiveness. Erica, trying to be supportive, would ask gentle questions over morning coffee. Had she seen any interesting job listings? Maybe she could help polish her resume. The change was instantaneous. Chloe's shoulders would hike towards her ears, a fortress wall sliding down behind her eyes. Her answers were curt, non-committal clouds of words that evaporated upon contact. The market's tough. I'm networking. Don't worry about me, The last was always delivered with a sharpness that felt like a slap, a warning to retreat. The vulnerable woman who had arrived with a single suitcase seemed to be receding, replaced by a prickly, impatient stranger who viewed simple concern as an interrogation. The tension crystallized during a Sunday dinner with their parents. Erica had hoped the familiar setting, the comfort of their mother's pot roast, would soften Chloe's edges. Instead, it became a stage for her evasiveness. Their father, ever the pragmatic engineer, asked about her plans, suggesting contacts in his field. Chloe's smile was a tight, stretched line. She spoke in vague generalities about exploring options and weighing possibilities, a cloud of jargon that meant nothing. When their mother gently probed about her support system in Phoenix, asking if any friends were still in touch, Chloe's fork clattered against her plate. The sound was shockingly loud in the cozy dining room. I'm not in Phoenix anymore, Mom, she said, her voice icy. That life is over. Can we please just drop it? A heavy silence descended. Their parents exchanged a worried glance over the table. Erica stared at her sister, seeing not grief but a kind of furious, panicked guarding. It was the reaction of someone caught in a lie, not someone nursing a heartbreak. For the rest of the meal, Chloe contributed only monosyllables, her gaze fixed on her plate as if it held the secrets to her escape. The drive home was silent, the car filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Erica watched the streetlights slide over Chloe's profile, the set jaw, the distant stare, and felt the first true cold trickle of doubt. This wasn't the process of healing. It was the careful maintenance of a facade, and Erica, with a sinking heart, began to wonder what exactly was hiding. Behind it, the cracks in the surface were no longer hairline fractures. They were widening into chasms, and the sister she was trying to pull back from the edge seemed to be standing on a completely different cliff altogether. The dinner with their parents left a residue, a fine, gritty dust of disquiet that settled over Erica's thoughts and refused to be swept away. In the days that followed, her observant nature, honed by years of marketing analytics where patterns revealed truth, shifted its focus from campaign data to her sister's behavior. She became a reluctant detective in her own home, each small anomaly a piece of evidence she did not want to collect. The hopeful narrative of reunion was now competing with a darker, more insidious plotline, and Erica fought to ignore the growing stack of inconsistencies. The first tangible proof appeared not through any deliberate search, but by mundane accident. Taking out the kitchen trash, a bag heavy with coffee grounds and discarded takeout containers, a flash of crisp white paper caught her eye against the dark plastic. It was a receipt, crumpled but not fully concealed. Mechanically, she pulled it free, smoothing it against her leg. The header was from Le Cille, a notoriously expensive French restaurant in Beverly Hills she had only ever read about in lifestyle magazines. The date was from the previous Friday evening, a night Chloe had claimed she was staying over with an old college friend in Santa Monica who was going through a breakup and needed moral support. The total, even before Erica's eyes found the bottom line, made her breath hitch. It was more than her weekly grocery budget, but it was the detail printed clearly in the itemization that turned the air in her small kitchen cold. Table for two. Erica stood frozen, the rustling bag forgotten at her feet. A table for two. Chloe, who spoke of maxed-out credit cards and the financial ruin of her divorce, had paid for a dinner for two at a temple of luxury. The friend in Santa Monica, a woman named Melissa whom Erica had never met and Chloe now mentioned with vague, dismissive frequency, supposedly lived in a modest apartment and worked as a paralegal. This receipt suggested a different story altogether, one of clandestine extravagance. Erica's mind raced, trying to force the pieces into a less alarming shape. Maybe Melissa had treated her, maybe it was a mistake. But the receipt was from Chloe's credit card, the last 4 digits matching the one she used for the occasional shared grocery run. The evidence was impersonal, clinical, and damning. She carefully recrumpled the paper and pushed it deep into the trash, as if burying it could bury her suspicion. But the seed was planted. Later that day, she casually asked Chloe about her weekend, mentioning she'd tried to call on Friday night but got no answer. Chloe, scrolling on her phone on the couch, didn't look up. "Oh yeah, Melissa's place has terrible service. We just talked and drank cheap wine all night. It was pretty depressing, actually." The lie was delivered with such effortless nonchalance that Erica felt a physical pang. The contrast between the story of cheap wine and the reality of $100 entrees was a chasm, and Chloe stood on the far side, calmly building a wall. Erica's unease, now a living thing with a heartbeat of its own, curdled into a low-grade anxiety that hummed in her veins. She watched her sister move through the apartment, this familiar stranger, and saw not grief but calculation. The whispered phone calls took on a new, sinister dimension. The missing and reappearing items felt less like forgetfulness and more like a testing of boundaries, a mapping of the terrain. She chastised herself viciously, internally. Her sister was in need. She was vulnerable, hurt, lashing out. To be suspicious was to betray the very bond she had vowed to rebuild. She was being paranoid, letting the stress of work and this new domestic arrangement warp her perception. But the rationalizations felt thin, worn, transparent by the glaring light of the receipt. The Chloe of their childhood had been a fierce protector, but she had also been a spectacularly convincing liar when it suited her, capable of looking their mother in the eye and swearing she had no idea how the car's fender got dented. That skill, it seemed, had not atrophied with age, it had refined. Erica found herself studying her sister's face when she thought she wasn't looking, searching for the ghost of the girl she knew in the opaque eyes of the woman before her. The hope that had felt so bright and buoyant was now a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She was no longer simply welcoming a sister home. She was sharing her sanctuary with a mystery, and the clues she was gathering pointed not toward healing, but toward a hidden agenda she was desperately afraid to understand. The foundation of their reunion was cracking, and Erica stood atop it, feeling the tremors deepen with every passing, secretive day. The unease, once a subtle whisper, had grown into a constant, low-frequency hum in Erica's life, a sound she could not mute. It colored her mornings with a faint grey anxiety and made the quiet of the apartment feel watchful. She found herself inventorying her belongings mentally, a pointless exercise that only highlighted the creeping sense of violation. It was against this backdrop that she reached for her favorite cashmere sweater one cool Tuesday evening, seeking its soft, familiar comfort like a talisman. It was not in its usual drawer, neatly folded between a wool cardigan and a lightweight hoodie. A mild frown creased her forehead. She checked the laundry basket, then the back of her closet. Nothing. A faint prickle of irritation began to replace her initial puzzlement. The sweater, a dove-grey v-neck, was not particularly expensive, but it was hers, a gift from her mother 2 birthdays past, worn to a soft, perfect fuzz. Its absence felt personal, a tiny theft in a series of small, unsettling disappearances. 2 days later, the mystery resolved itself in a way that offered no relief. Carrying a basket of her own clean laundry, past the open door of the spare room, Erica's gaze snagged on a heap of dark clothes spilling from Chloe's smaller hamper. There, nestled amidst black jeans and a charcoal tank top, was a slash of pale grey. The cashmere, it lay casually discarded, one sleeve tangled as if it had been pulled off in haste. Erica stopped dead, the wicker basket handle digging into her palm. A cold clarity washed over her, sharp and bracing. She did not confront Chloe immediately. She let the moment settle, watching the sweater as if it were a sleeping animal she dared not startle. That evening, after a dinner where Chloe spoke brightly and emptily about maybe taking a coding class, Erica found her voice. It emerged calmer than she felt. "I couldn't find my grey cashmere sweater," she said, rinsing a plate at the sink. "The one from Mom." Chloe, wiping the counter, didn't miss a beat. "Oh, that, I borrowed it the other day. Sorry, I meant to ask. I was just so cold and it looked so cozy." She offered a smile that was all practiced apology. "It's in my laundry. I'll wash it and give it back tomorrow." The explanation was smooth, plausible, delivered with the effortless grace of someone used to glossing over minor transgressions. Borrowed. The word echoed in the tiled kitchen. It implied a temporary, consensual transfer, a sisterly sharing. It erased the act of taking without asking, of folding it into a hamper as if it were her own. Erica simply nodded, the water running over her hands until they were numb. The next afternoon the sweater reappeared, neatly folded on the foot of Erica's bed. Chloe must have placed it there while she was at work. For a long moment, Erica just looked at it, this returned piece of her world. Then she picked it up, bringing the soft fabric to her face. The clean, floral scent of Chloe's detergent was there, overpowering and artificial. But underneath it, buried in the very fibres, was another scent, faint but unmistakable. A cologne, woody and sharp, with a top note of citrus and something darker like sandalwood or amber. It was utterly unfamiliar, a scent that belonged to no man Erica knew, certainly not to Chloe's ex-husband who had favoured sporty aquatic sprays. Erica stood frozen in the middle of her bedroom, the sweater held aloft. The borrowed sweater, the expensive dinner for 2, the whispered phone calls. The cologne was a ghost in the wall, a sensory signature left by a stranger who existed in the shadowy margins of Chloe's new life. This was no longer about a missing item or a minor breach of etiquette. This was a violation of a deeper, more fundamental trust. The sweater was a vessel, and it carried back not just the fibre of her property, but the essence of her sister's deceit. She folded the sweater slowly, her movements precise and deliberate, and placed it in the very back of her drawer. She would never wear it again. The soft cashmere now felt contaminated, a physical reminder that the sister sleeping down the hall was living a parallel existence, one that involved secret dinners and unfamiliar men and the casual appropriation of Erica's things. The anxiety that had been humming within her deepened, tuning itself to a new, more urgent frequency. This small, intimate betrayal was a key turning in a lock, opening a door in Erica's mind to a chilling possibility. The woman she was trying to help was not just hiding a painful past, but actively constructing a hidden present, one that seemed to circle ever closer to Erica's own life, leaving the faint, unsettling trace of an unknown man's cologne in its wake. The borrowed sweater, now exiled to the back of the drawer, became a silent, accusing presence in Erica's mind. Its phantom scent of unfamiliar cologne seemed to linger in the apartment, a ghost she could not exorcise. She found herself scrutinizing every interaction with Chloe, each casual remark now a potential cipher in a code she was desperate not to crack. The atmosphere in the apartment thickened, strained by the weight of unspoken suspicions and the careful choreography of 2 people pretending everything was normal. It was against this taut backdrop that the fragile pretense finally snapped. A midweek work-from-home day provided the stage. Erica was stationed at her reclaimed desk in the living room, her laptop open to a spreadsheet, her concentration a frayed thread. Chloe had remained sequestered in the spare room since breakfast, the door firmly shut, a common enough occurrence, but one that now felt ominously deliberate. The morning passed in a haze of muted clicks and the distant hum of city traffic. Erica's attempts to focus were futile. Her attention was a trapped bird fluttering against the closed door down the hall. Then the murmur began. It was low at first, just the indistinct rumble of a voice through wood and drywall. But as the minutes ticked past, the volume escalated. It was not the cadence of a friendly chat or even a heated debate with a customer service representative. This was something else, clipped, urgent, the rhythm sharp and staccato. Erica's fingers stilled over her keyboard. She held her breath, the numbers on her screen blurring into meaningless glyphs. The voice was Chloe's, but stripped of all the performative vulnerability, the practiced weariness she displayed in front of Erica. This voice was cold, metallic, laced with an impatience that bordered on contempt. Erica caught fragments, sharp shards of sentences that pierced the barrier between them. Has to be seamless, no room for error. A pause, then a hissed response to something unheard. I know the timeline is tight. Do you think I'm an idiot? Erica's blood seemed to slow, thickening in her veins. She sat perfectly still, a statue of dread. The assets are clearer now, once the access is solidified. Then, clear as a shard of ice driven into her heart, her own name. Erica, followed by a short, mirthless laugh that was utterly alien, is surprisingly naive. It's almost too easy. The words plan and soon followed, delivered not with hope, but with the cold precision of a strategist reviewing a battle map. They hung in the air of the silent living room, toxic and undeniable. Chloe's tone was not that of a grieving divorcee or a lost soul seeking shelter. It was the tone of a CEO in a hostile takeover, of a gambler calculating final odds. It was strategic, detached, and utterly ruthless. Erica's heart did not race. Instead, it seemed to sink, a cold, heavy stone dropping through the cavity of her chest, pulling everything vital down with it. The hopeful sister who had welcomed Chloe home, the woman who had built pillow forts and shared secrets, that person had never been in this apartment. She was a fiction, a carefully crafted persona donned for a specific role. The real Chloe was in that room, speaking in a voice of ice about plans and timelines, and leveraging Erica's own perceived naivete. The murmuring ceased as abruptly as it had begun, a final, low command, unintelligible, then silence. A moment later, the distinct click of the phone ending the call. In the ringing quiet that followed, Erica became aware of the frantic hammering of her own pulse in her ears. She stared, unseeing, at her spreadsheet. The colourful cells and neat rows now looked like a child's toy, an absurd distraction from the chilling reality that had just been confirmed. She had not imagined the distance, the lies, the theft. The borrowed sweater, the expensive receipt, the defensive evasions, they were not symptoms of trauma. They were clues, and they all pointed to this moment, to the cold voice behind the door. Her sister was not hiding from a painful past. She was orchestrating a future, and Erica, with a dawning, horrific clarity, understood that she was not a sanctuary in that future. She was an asset, an obstacle, a piece on a board to be maneuvered. The hopeful narrative she had clung to since Chloe's arrival shattered completely, leaving behind a landscape of pure, desolate betrayal. The love she had offered, the space she had shared, the trust she had extended, all of it had been fuel for this cold, calculating machine. Erica remained at her desk, motionless, as the afternoon light began to slant through the windows, painting the room in long, melancholy shadows. The home she had built felt invaded, not by a sister, but by a stranger with a familiar face and a heart of frost. The conversation was over, but its echoes would reverberate in the silence forever, a poison seeping into the very foundations of her life. The sinking in her heart was complete. She had hit bottom, and it was colder and harder than she had ever imagined possible. The cold clarity that had settled in Erica's chest after overhearing the conversation did not dissipate. It hardened, a glacial weight that made every breath feel deliberate. The apartment was no longer a shared space but a contested territory, every sound a potential threat, every silence a loaded pause. Chloe moved through the rooms with a renewed, almost theatrical normalcy, asking about Erica's day, commenting on the weather. Her performance so polished it felt like mockery. Each pleasantry was a tiny needle, a reminder of the vast, ugly truth lurking beneath the veneer. Erica played her part, her responses automatic, her smiles a stiff muscle memory. Inside, she was a vault of dread and a storm of questions. What plan? What assets? What access? Torment became her constant companion. It whispered to her in the dead of night as she lay staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound from the spare room. It sat with her at breakfast, turning her coffee bitter. The need to know, to uncover the specific shape of the threat, became a physical ache, a hunger that gnawed at her reason. The moral line she had always drawn, respect for privacy, the sanctity of trust between sisters, now seemed like a quaint, foolish notion from a story that was not hers. That story was over. The woman in her home was an imposter, and imposters' rules did not apply. The decision, when it came, was not a dramatic leap, but a grim, inevitable step. It crystallized one evening as she washed dishes, her hands submerged in soapy water, watching Chloe gather a towel and toiletries before heading to the bathroom. The ritual was familiar. The twist of the knob to start the shower, the hiss of water hitting tile, the eventual billow of steam under the door. A window of opportunity, narrow and fraught. Erica's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of guilt and desperation. She waited, counting the seconds until the steady rush of the shower was the only sound. Then, moving with a speed that felt both alien and necessary, she dried her hands and crossed the living room. Chloe's laptop sat open on the coffee table, its screen dark but not asleep, a slumbering beast of secrets. A part of Erica screamed that this was wrong, a violation that would forever stain her own soul. A louder, more terrified part insisted it was survival. She tapped the trackpad. The screen glowed to life, illuminating her tense face in the dim room. No password. The oversight was shocking, either a staggering arrogance or a calculated test. The desktop was unnervingly tidy, folders neatly arranged. Her eyes, scanning frantically, landed on an open browser tab, an email client. Her cursor hovered, a moment of final hesitation drowned by the relentless shower's white noise. She clicked. It was the drafts folder. And there it was at the top, a draft with no recipient address entered, save just hours before. The subject line was blank, but the preview text made her blood turn to ice. She clicked it open. The email was a masterpiece of cold implication. It was not explicitly damning, but its language was a maze of corporate euphemism that felt infinitely more sinister in this context. Per our discussion, it began, the primary asset remains underappreciated but highly accessible. The familial proximity provides unparalleled leverage for reassignment of value. Erica's breath caught. Familial proximity. Her eyes raced down. Liquidity event was mentioned, followed by ensuring the triggering incident appears contingent, not deliberate. The words swam before her, triggering incident. A cold sweat broke out on the back of her neck. The email continued, discussing timeline acceleration due to external pressure from creditors, and ended with a chilling line. Once the access is solidified through continued cohabitation, we move. Confirm you've reviewed the updated policy annotations. Policy annotations. The phrase echoed the cold strategy in Chloe's overheard call. Erica's hand trembled, the cursor shaking on the screen. She needed to see more, to scroll, to find a name, a clue, anything concrete. Her finger moved to the trackpad. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. The sound was soft, but in the hyper-alert silence of the room, it was a gunshot. Erica's head snapped up. The shower was still running, but the quality of the sound had changed slightly, the water hitting the shower curtain now, not the tile. Someone moving. Her pulse exploded into a frantic gallop. With a speed born of pure panic, she clicked out of the draft, closed the browser tab, and tapped the trackpad to send the screen back into darkness. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping softly, just as the bathroom door opened. Chloe emerged, wrapped in a cloud of steam and a large towel, her hair turbaned in another. Her eyes went immediately to the coffee table, to her laptop, then to Erica, who stood frozen a few feet away, trying to compose her face into something neutral. "Everything okay?" Chloe asked, her voice casual, but her gaze was sharp, scanning Erica's posture, the distance. From the table, "Fine," Erica managed, her own voice sounding thin and reedy. "Just getting some water." She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen, a useless pantomime. Chloe's eyes lingered on the laptop for a heartbeat too long before she offered a slow, measured smile. "Right, well, don't let me stop you." She padded toward the spare room, leaving damp footprints on the hardwood, but paused at her doorway, looking back. "You look paler, you should get some sleep." The door clicked shut. Erica stood rooted to the spot, the phantom words from the email draft burning in her mind. Primary asset, leveraging family access, triggering incident. The interruption had been a physical wrench, tearing her from the brink of revelation. She had seen just enough to know the threat was real, structured and financial, but not enough to understand its full horror. The digital trail was there, a path leading into a dark wood, and she had been pulled back from its edge just as the trees began to close in. The knowledge was a poison, but the ignorance of what lay in the next sentence was a torture. She was left in the silent living room, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly loud, holding a few terrifying fragments of a blueprint, and the certain, chilling knowledge that her sister was not just a liar but an architect. The interrupted search left Erica stranded in a purgatory of knowing and not knowing. The phrases from the email draft, primary asset, triggering incident, policy annotations, replayed in her mind with a relentless hammering rhythm, a sinister poem whose full meaning remained just out of reach. Chloe's measured smile, her comment about looking pale, now felt like the cool assessment of a chess player watching her opponent flinch. The apartment was a cage of silent scrutiny. Erica moved through her routines mechanically, her smiles brittle, her conversations with Chloe a minefield of subtext she was too exhausted to navigate. The need for answers became a physical thirst, a dryness in her throat that nothing could quench. The laptop was no longer an option. After that night, a password lock appeared on its wake screen, a digital drawbridge raised. The direct path was closed. Erica's mind, frayed by fear and suspicion, began to cast back, sifting through the debris of their shared past for another key. It arrived not as a flash of inspiration, but as a slow, creeping memory of a time before the rift, a minor collaboration from a more innocent era. Years ago, when Chloe was first in Phoenix and Erica was still in college, they had shared a cloud storage account. It was meant for swapping large files, photos from a family reunion, a scanned copy of their grandmother's recipe book. The password had been something simple, a combination of their childhood pet's name and the street they grew up on. Erica had not accessed it in half a decade, assuming the service had long since purged the dormant account. But the memory of the credentials lingered, a ghost in the archives of her mind. One afternoon, under the guise of a migraine that required a dark, quiet room, Erica retreated to her bedroom. She closed the door, the click of the latch feeling both cowardly and necessary. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she opened her own laptop, her fingers cold and clumsy on the keys. She navigated to the cloud service's website, her pulse a frantic bird in her throat. The login screen was a bland blue portal. She typed the old email address, half expecting an error. It was accepted. She entered the password, a name and a number that tasted of childhood. The wheel spun for an agonizing second. The login was successful. A sparse directory greeted her. A folder labeled family photos, another called recipes, dusty digital relics. Her eyes scanned the list, disappointment beginning to curdle the adrenaline. Then she saw it, tucked at the bottom, its timestamp recent, updated just 3 months prior. A folder named X, her breath hitched. She clicked. Inside were 2 PDF files. The first was a scanned document, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges in the scan. The letterhead was from a life insurance company. The policy was taken out by her parents over 15 years ago, a prudent, boring act of adulthood she vaguely remembered them mentioning. The beneficiaries were listed clearly. Erica Adams and Chloe Adams, to split the payout equally in the event of their parents' death. It was standard, somber, and utterly expected. The second file was a duplicate of the first, but this one was annotated. Digital highlights in garish yellow and red streaked across the text. Notes were typed in the margins in a small, precise font. Erica zoomed in, her heart now a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The highlights focused on specific clauses: double indemnity for accidental death, payout scheduled to secondary beneficiaries if primary is deceased, contestability period. The annotations were not explanations. They were analyses, arrows, connected clauses. One note next to the double indemnity clause read, significant multiplier, requires formal accident report. Another, beside the beneficiary succession terms, stated, clarify order, all to survivor. But it was the final note, scrawled in a comment bubble near the top of the document, that stopped the air in Erica's lungs. It was a simple, chilling question. Does accident include domestic mishap, e.g., fall, poisoning, allergic reaction? Investigate precedents. The world narrowed to the glow of the screen, the pixels forming words that reframed her entire reality. This wasn't about their parents. The annotations, the recent timestamp, the folder's clandestine name, it all pointed to a horrifying reinterpretation. The policy was a vehicle. The primary asset from the email draft wasn't a house or a stock portfolio. It was her life. The triggering incident was her death, designed to look contingent, accidental. The familial proximity and continued cohabitation were the means to engineer it. Chloe wasn't just a liar or a thief. She was a beneficiary, studying the fine print on a contract that would pay out upon her sister's demise. A violent, silent tremor took hold of Erica's body. She stared at the highlighted phrase, all to survivor, understanding with nauseating clarity that in the event of her accidental death, with their parents still living, Chloe would very likely receive everything. The dinner receipts, the whispered plans, the cold strategy, it all coalesced into this single, scanned document. It was a blueprint for murder disguised as financial planning. The love she had offered, the home she had shared, had been nothing but a stage for this grotesque calculation. The digital trail had not just confirmed her fears, it had illuminated a chasm of betrayal so deep and dark that its edges seemed to swallow the light from the room. She was not living with a sister. She was living with her own actuarial risk, annotated and highlighted, waiting for the right tragic accident to befall her. The annotated insurance document burned behind Erica's eyes, a phantom watermark on every surface she looked at. The words "all to survivor" and "domestic mishap" echoed in the silent spaces between her thoughts, transforming her apartment from a sanctuary into a crime scene in waiting. For 2 days, she moved through a fog of cold, crystalline terror, performing the routines of her life with the precision of an automaton. She smiled at Chloe over coffee, discussed mundane work dramas, all while her mind screamed with the horrific calculus she had uncovered. The need for final, undeniable confirmation became a physical imperative. She could not live in this limbo of knowing and yet not confronting. She needed to see the truth reflected in Chloe's eyes, to hear the lie shatter against the evidence. She chose neutral ground, a public place where the masks might slip under pressure. She texted Chloe, the message bland and harmless: "Need a break from my desk. Meet me at the Grind on 3rd for coffee, 4 p.m. The cafe was bright, bustling, filled with the innocuous chatter of strangers and the hiss of steam wands. It felt safe, a stage where a scene of ordinary sisterhood could play out, or where a hidden truth could be cornered under the fluorescent lights. Erica arrived early, claiming a small table in a corner partially shielded by a large fiddle-leaf fig. She ordered a black coffee she knew she wouldn't drink, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to still their trembling. She watched the entrance, each chime of the doorbell sending a jolt through her nervous system. When Chloe finally appeared, scanning the room, Erica's breath caught. There was no trace of the weary, vulnerable divorcee. Chloe looked agitated, her movements sharp and bird-like. Her eyes were bright but not with warmth. They darted around the cafe with a restless, scanning intensity, as if assessing threats or exits. She wore a sleek, dark jacket Erica had never seen before, and her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail that sharpened her features. She looked, Erica realized with a fresh chill, like someone going into a business meeting, not a casual coffee with her sister. Chloe slid into the opposite chair, offering a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is a surprise, everything okay?" Her voice was light, but there was a wire of tension running through it. "Just needed some air," Erica said, forcing her own voice to remain level. "How's the job hunt?" It was a pathetic opener, a throwback to the earlier, naive days of her suspicion. Chloe's gaze flickered with impatience. "It's a process. You know how it is." She flagged down a passing server, ordering an espresso with a curtness that bordered on rudeness. The pleasantries were ashes in Erica's mouth. The air between them crackled with unspoken accusations. Erica knew she had to steer the conversation into the dark water. She took a shallow breath, the words feeling like shards of glass in her throat. "I was going through some old digital files the other day," she began, watching Chloe's face with a hunter's focus. "Trying to clear space, I came across our old shared cloud storage." A subtle shift. Chloe's fingers, which had been drumming a silent rhythm on the tabletop, stilled. Her eyes fixed on Erica's, the brightness in them hardening into something glassy and alert. She said nothing, waiting. "There was an interesting folder there," Erica continued, her voice dropping, barely audible over the cafe's din. "Recently updated. It had a scan of Mom and Dad's old life insurance policy." The change was instantaneous and profound. All the agitated energy seemed to drain from Chloe's body, replaced by a terrifying stillness. The colour leached from her face, leaving her complexion a sickly grey under the cafe's lights. Her lips, recently pressed into that tight smile, parted slightly. For a fraction of a second, raw, unguarded panic flooded her features, a dilation of pupils, a minute twitch at the corner of her mouth. It was the look of a conspirator whose secret blueprint had been discovered on the kitchen table. Then, as swiftly as it appeared, the panic was incinerated by a surge of pure, white-hot fury. It contorted Chloe's face, stripping away the last vestiges of the sister Erica knew. Her eyes narrowed into slits of venomous light. "You went through my files," she hissed, the words low and guttural, meant for Erica alone. The accusation was an admission in itself. She didn't ask what folder or which policy. She knew exactly what Erica was talking about. "It was a shared folder," Erica countered, her own fear now a cold, solid block in her chest, giving her a strange, detached courage. "With annotations, questions about accidents, about beneficiaries." Chloe leaned forward, her body coiled like a spring. The civility of the cafe, the clatter of cups, the murmur of conversations, All of it fell away, leaving only the charged void between them. "You have no idea what you're looking at," Chloe spat, her voice trembling not with fear but with rage. "You're so smug in your little life in your tidy apartment, you can't possibly understand the pressure, the things people have to do." "To do what, Chloe?" Erica interrupted the question, a whisper. "To collect on a policy, to make an accident happen." The directness was a detonation. Chloe recoiled as if physically struck, her fury momentarily checked by the shock of hearing the unthinkable spoken aloud. Her eyes darted around, checking if anyone was listening. When she looked back at Erica, the fury had mutated into something colder, more terrifying, a stark, naked acknowledgement. She didn't deny it. She didn't offer excuses about financial planning or morbid curiosity. The sheer force of her reaction, the panic that had preceded the rage, was the confession. It confirmed every whispered phone call, every highlighted clause, every chilling note in the margin. Erica's worst fears were not imagined. They were sitting across from her, breathing the same coffee-scented air, vibrating with a hatred that had been meticulously concealed beneath a mask of sisterly need. Chloe stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. Several people glanced over. She loomed over the table, her face a mask of contempt. "You think you're so clever," she said, her voice now dangerously calm, each word a drop of ice. "But you're not, you're just in the way." She threw a few crumpled bills onto the table, her gaze never leaving Erica's pallid face. "Stay out of things you don't understand." Then she turned and walked out, her exit swift and purposeful, leaving Erica alone at the small table. The espresso she had ordered sat untouched, a dark, bitter pool in a tiny white cup. The confrontation was over. It had spiraled and crashed in less than 5 minutes. There had been no denial, no tearful explanation. Only panic, fury, and a threat veiled as a warning. The confirmation was absolute, and it was more devastating than any doubt could ever have been. The sister was gone. In her place was a stranger with a familiar face, who knew exactly what the insurance document was, and who had just confirmed, beyond any last shred of hope, that Erica's life was the central figure in a monstrous calculation. The cafe's warmth and noise rushed back in, a cruel parody of normalcy, as Erica sat frozen, staring at the empty chair, the ghost of her sister's fury still hanging in the air like gun smoke. The ghost of Chloe's fury followed Erica home from the cafe, a toxic haze that permeated the silent apartment. The confirmation had been absolute, yet it offered no closure, only a deeper, more terrifying abyss. Knowing her sister had plotted her death was one thing, understanding the full machinery of that plot was another. The annotated policy was a blueprint, but who had drawn the lines? What specific pressures had turned Chloe from a sister into a strategist of murder? Erica's mind, reeling from the confrontation, latched onto a single, persistent gut feeling, a pull toward the quiet, orderly world of her parents' suburban home. It was the origin point of their family, the place where all their stories began. If there were answers to the why and the how, they might be buried there in the soil of their shared past. She drove to her parents' house the next morning under the pretext of returning a borrowed casserole dish, a flimsy alibi that felt pathetic even to her. Her mother, ever welcoming, fussed over her, noting her pallor and the shadows under her eyes. Erica brushed off the concern, claiming work stress. Her father was in his home office, a sanctum of filing cabinets and model airplanes, a place where problems were solved with logic and blueprints. After a few minutes of strained small talk in the kitchen, Erica excused herself, saying she wanted to check if she'd left an old book in the office. The room smelled of lemon polish and aged paper. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. It was a place of calm, of childhood memories of doing homework at the big oak desk. Now it felt like the site of a potential excavation. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she closed the door softly behind her. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that she had to look. She started with the most logical place, her father's meticulous filing system. The cabinet labelled financial was unlocked. Her hands trembled as she pulled open the drawer, the familiar scent of manila folders and ink filling her nostrils. She bypassed the sections for taxes and mortgages, her fingers trailing over tabs until she found one marked, Correspondence Legal Investigative. The label sent a fresh jolt of cold through her veins. Inside was a slim folder. The most recent document on top was a letter, dated just 3 weeks prior. The letterhead was from a private investigation firm called Veritas Assurance. It was addressed to her father. The salutation was formal. Erica's eyes scanned the opening paragraph, a polite summary of services rendered per his request. Then the language shifted, becoming stark and clinical. The investigators' findings detailed a financial portrait of Chloe that was far more desperate than the vague tales of divorce-related hardship. It spoke of significant, undisclosed debt accrued not just during the marriage, but after. High-interest loans from unregulated lenders, massive credit card balances, and traces of gambling-related transactions through offshore payment processors. The phrase "financially desperate" was used, underlined for emphasis. Then came the association. The report noted Chloe's repeated contact with a man named Marcus Vance, described as having a checkered financial history, and known to authorities for suspected fraud and coercion in several inheritance-related schemes. Their communications, intercepted via a subpoenaed email account, showed Vance coaching Chloe on the nuances of beneficiary law and the forensic investigation of accidental deaths. The word coaching was chilling in its implication of a teacher and a student. The final section of the letter was the most devastating. It summarized the investigator's conclusion, stated with professional detachment. The subject, Chloe Adams, was actively researching methodologies to expedite the transfer of assets from a family member, with a particular focus on scenarios that would trigger a double indemnity life insurance payout. The subject's inquiries, coupled with her financial pressures and her association with Vance, indicated a high-risk situation. The investigator strongly recommended the client, Erica's father, consider protective measures for all potentially affected parties. Erica's vision blurred. The words swam on the page, then snapped into a terrible, crystalline focus. The potentially affected party was her. The protective measures were needed because her sister, guided by a conman, was researching how to engineer her death for money. The annotated policy was not a theoretical exercise, it was coursework. The whispered phone calls were likely with Marcus Vance. The expensive dinner was probably with him. The unfamiliar cologne on her sweater was his scent. Every piece of the horrifying puzzle, the financial desperation, the sinister mentor, the cold-blooded research, clicked into place with a final, sickening certainty. The implication was no longer just clear. It was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. Chloe wasn't merely a beneficiary contemplating a morbid opportunity. She was an active participant in a plot, a student of tragedy, working with a professional predator to turn her sister's life into a liquidity event. The love in their childhood home, the memories embedded in the very walls of this office, had been weaponized into a feasibility study. Erica carefully placed the letter back in the folder, her movements slow and precise, as if handling a live explosive. She closed the filing cabinet, the metallic click echoing in the silent room. The unthinkable truth was now a documented fact, sitting in her father's tidy cabinet. The gut feeling had been correct. She had come seeking answers, and she had found a portrait of her sister not as a fallen angel, but as a calculated, desperate monster in the making, her betrayal not a crime of passion, but a cold, researched business plan. The sanctuary of her parents' house was forever violated, and the last fragile hope that any of this was a misunderstanding turned to dust and blew away on the sunbeam, cutting through the quiet, ordinary room. The drive from her parents' house back to her apartment was a blur of asphalt and blinding sunlight, the investigator's clinical phrases etching themselves onto the insides of her eyelids. Financially desperate, association with Marcus Vance, methodologies to expedite asset transfer. The words were sterile, but their meaning was a visceral rot in her gut. Erica felt untethered, a ghost piloting her own car through a world that had shed its familiar skin. The comforting landmarks of her neighborhood, the corner market, the dog park, the mural on the side of the laundromat, now looked like stage props in a play where she was the unwitting Mark. She had gone seeking the why, and the answer was more banal and more horrifying than she could have imagined. Money, plain and simple, and a sister willing to treat her life as a line item on a balance sheet. She did not go home. The thought of walking into that apartment, of sharing air with Chloe, of pretending for even one more hour, was impossible. Instead, she drove in aimless circles until the sun began to dip below the skyline, painting the smog in shades of bruised orange. Finally, as twilight gathered, she turned her car toward her parents' street once more. They needed to know. The burden of this terrible knowledge was too immense to carry alone, and the investigator's letter proved they were already in the shadows, suspecting. The confrontation at the cafe had been between sisters. This one would shatter the entire family. Her mother opened the door, her face immediately folding into concern. "Erica, back so soon, is everything all right?" Behind her in the living room, her father looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "No," Erica said, her voice hollow. "Nothing is all right." She stepped inside, the familiar scent of lemon polish and her mother's lavender sachets now smelling of betrayal. She didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room, feeling like a prosecutor about to present evidence to a reluctant jury. "It's Chloe," she began, the name tasting of ash. She laid it out in a flat, unadorned recitation, the words falling like stones into the quiet room. The overheard phone call, the email draft, the annotated insurance policy in the cloud folder. She described the confrontation at the cafe, the panic and fury in Chloe's eyes that served as a confession. Finally, her voice trembling only slightly, she mentioned the letter from Verita's assurance she had found in the office. "I know you hired an investigator," she said, looking at her father. "I know you already suspected something." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that mirrored Erica's own weeks-long descent. Her father slowly removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. The newspaper slid, forgotten, to the floor. He looked older, the lines on his face deepening into crevices of grief. We didn't want to believe it," her mother whispered, the words barely audible. "We thought we were being paranoid. She's our daughter." Her father stood up, his movements heavy. He walked to the antique roll-top desk in the corner, the one that had always held the family's important papers. He unlocked it with a small key from his pocket, his hands steady but slow. "We had our suspicions after she kept asking for money," he said, his voice gravelly with emotion. The stories kept changing. First it was medical bills from the divorce stress, then it was a debt her ex had left in her name. Then it was for a course to restart her career. He pulled out a slender file, thicker than the investigators. "We wanted to help, she's our child." He opened the file and spread the contents on the coffee table. Bank statements printed from their joint savings account. Erica leaned forward, her heart a cold, hard lump. The transactions were highlighted in yellow. Withdrawals, $5,000 in February, another 8 in March, 10,000 in early April. The memos, written in their father's precise hand, simply said Chloe Medical or Chloe Debt Relief. The total was staggering, a significant portion of their careful retirement. "Savings, she was so convincing," her mother said, tears now streaming silently down her cheeks. "She'd cry. She'd talk about how ashamed she was. She promised to pay us back as soon as she got on her feet." She pointed a trembling finger at the April withdrawal. "That one was for an emergency surgery she claimed she needed. A cyst. She showed us a fake clinic website." Erica stared at the numbers, the proof of her parents' gutted trust and emptied savings. The money hadn't gone to medical bills or debt relief. It had funded expensive dinners at Lucille. It had perhaps paid Marcus Vance for his coaching. It had financed the cold, calculated research into her own death. The betrayal was not confined to the spare room in her apartment. Its roots had spread here, into the heart of the family home, sucking dry the well of parental love and trust. "We felt something was off," her father admitted, sinking back into his armchair, the fight gone out of him. "The stories didn't add up. The investigator was a last resort. We got the preliminary report 2 weeks ago. We've been trying to process, trying to figure out how to tell you, how to protect you." The shared trust that had been the foundation of their family, the unspoken certainty that they would always have each other's backs, that blood meant unconditional support, shattered in that moment. It didn't crack or fray. It exploded into a million glittering, sharp fragments that littered the cozy living room floor. They were 3 people huddled together, united not by love for the fourth, but by the devastating, mutual comprehension of her monstrous deceit. The parent-child bond, the sisterly bond, were both lies now, poisoned by greed and manipulation. The web of deceit Chloe had woven ensnared them all, leaving them trapped in a new, awful reality where the person they had loved and nurtured was a stranger capable of plotting a sister's death and milking her parents' life savings to fund the plan. The room was warm, but a permanent cold had settled in Erica's bones, and she saw the same winter reflected in her parents' devastated eyes. The shared devastation in her parents' living room was a cold, solid thing, a new family heirloom of betrayal. The bank statements lay on the table like autopsy reports, detailing the financial hemorrhage Chloe had inflicted. The investigator's letter provided the grim diagnosis. Yet, even as the awful truth settled over them, a shroud woven from lies, greed, and predation, Erica's mind, now a machine honed for parsing horror, continued to whir. The why was answered. The how was outlined in clinical annotations, but a specific chilling when suddenly clawed its way up from the depths of recent memory, demanding attention. It arrived not as a document or a confession, but as a sensory flashback, so vivid it momentarily blotted out the tear-streaked faces of her parents. It was the memory of a Saturday, just a month after Chloe had moved in. A day that had been framed as a spontaneous sisterly adventure, a chance to escape the city's grind and reconnect with nature. Chloe had been unusually insistent, her enthusiasm bright and brittle. "I know this amazing shortcut up to a Vista Point," she'd said, her eyes alight with a fervor that Erica had mistaken for nostalgic zeal. "The view will blow your mind, trust me." The word trust now rang in Erica's memory like a funeral bell. They had taken Chloe's car, an older sedan she'd bought cheaply in Phoenix. The shortcut quickly revealed itself as a treacherously narrow mountain road, a crumbling ribbon of asphalt clinging to the side of a canyon, with no guardrails and a sheer drop that stole the breath from Erica's lungs. The higher they climbed, the more the cheerful chatter died in Chloe's throat, replaced by a focused, intense silence. Erica remembered gripping the door handle, her knuckles white, making nervous jokes about their life insurance policies being up to date. Chloe had not laughed. Then, on a particularly sharp descending switchback, Erica had felt it. Chloe had pressed the brake pedal, and the response was wrong. A soft, spongy resistance, a delayed grab that sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through Erica's body. The car had lurched slightly, tires skittering on loose gravel near the edge before sluggishly obeying. "Brakes feel a little soft," Chloe had muttered, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her tone curiously flat, devoid of alarm. This old girl needs some TLC. She had not slowed down. If anything, she seemed to press harder, testing the curve, the car's momentum feeling like a held breath against the abyss. Erica had been too terrified in the moment to process anything but the visceral fear of plummeting. She had spent the rest of the drive, and the tense, silent hour at the overlook, consumed by relief at being on solid ground. The incident had been filed away as a scary quirk of an unreliable vehicle, a testament to Chloe's reckless overconfidence. She had even chastised her sister for it on the drive home, her voice shaking with post-fear anger. Chloe had offered a contrite, "You're right, that was stupid of me," before changing the subject. Now, in the terrible clarity of hindsight, every detail of that day reconfigured itself into something monstrous. The insistence on taking her car, the choice of an isolated, perilous route, the spongy brakes, the flat, unalarmed tone when noting them, the refusal to slow. It had not been an adventure. It had not been reckless confidence. It had been a test, a dry run. The realization struck Erica with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She swayed on her feet, her hand reaching out to steady herself on the back of the sofa. Her parents' murmured grief faded into a distant hum. The mountain road unspooled in her mind's eye, not as a memory, but as a crime scene. The spongy brakes weren't a neglected maintenance issue. They were a prop, a plausible deniability. A failed attempt could be written off as a tragic accident. A single woman, struggling financially, driving an old car with faulty brakes on a dangerous road. Who could question it, especially if the sole witness and intended victim was dead at the bottom of a canyon? "The mountain road," Erica whispered, the words raw and torn. Her parents looked up, their expressions shifting from grief to confusion. "A few weeks ago, she took me up this terrible road in the mountains. She said it was a shortcut." Erica described it, the details spilling out in a cold, clinical torrent that mirrored the investigator's report. The lack of guardrails, the switchback, the brakes, her own terror, Chloe's eerie calm. As she spoke, the colour drained from her mother's face anew, a fresh wave of horror dawning. Her father closed his eyes, a low groan escaping him, the sound of a man realising he'd been measuring a coffin for his own child. It was a rehearsal, Erica concluded, the final piece of the horrific puzzle clicking into its place with an almost audible snap. She was testing the location, the method, my reaction, seeing if the brakes would fail completely if she pumped them just right on a curve. The phrase domestic mishap from the annotated policy had been a red herring, a piece of gruesome brainstorming. The real plan was grander, cleaner in its apparent randomness, a tragic car accident on a remote road, no witnesses, no evidence of tampering that couldn't be explained by an old car's neglect. Just a grieving sister, the sole beneficiary, collecting on a policy with a double indemnity clause for accidental death. The web of deceit was now complete, every strand connected, glistening with malicious intent. It spanned from the abstract, highlighted clauses on a screen to the very real, gritty feel of gravel under skidding tires. It connected the cold calculations in a cafe to the visceral fear of a sheer drop. Chloe had not just researched and planned, she had field-tested her murder method with her intended victim in the passenger seat, calmly noting the results. The betrayal was no longer just financial or emotional. It was physical, existential. Erica had literally been driven to the edge by her sister, her life held in the balance of a spongy brake pedal and a calculated risk. The room was utterly silent, save for the ragged sound of their breathing. The last vestige of hope that perhaps it was all a terrible misunderstanding, a dark fantasy born of stress, evaporated. This was premeditation, refined through practice. The sister they had all tried to save had been methodically planning to erase one of them for profit, using their love and trust as the perfect camouflage. The web held them all entangled and helpless, but in that moment of horrific clarity, Erica also felt the first, faint tremor of something else. The desperate, survivalist need to tear herself free from its sticky, deadly strands, no matter the cost. The silence in Erica's apartment was a physical presence, thick and charged like the air before a lightning strike. She had returned from her parents' house, the memory of the mountain road now a fresh, open wound alongside all the others. The knowledge that her own death had been rehearsed, tested with her unwitting participation, had stripped away the last vestiges of shock, leaving behind a cold, clear fury. She did not know what she would say or do when she saw Chloe, only that the charade was over. The shared space was a lie. Every object, every corner felt like an accomplice to the plot. She found Chloe in the spare room, but not in a state of repose. A large, unfamiliar suitcase lay open on the bed, its dark maw gaping. Chloe was moving with a swift, efficient purpose, folding sweaters and stacking them inside with a precision that spoke of imminent departure. She did not look up as Erica appeared in the doorway, her back rigid, her movements mechanical. The room, once a hopeful sanctuary, now felt like the staging area. For a retreating army, Erica stood on the threshold, the weight of the unspoken horrors pressing against her ribs. Going somewhere, her voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth, a stranger's voice in her own home. Chloe paused, a black cashmere sweater suspended in her hands. She placed it carefully in the suitcase before turning. Her expression was not one of surprise or guilt, but of a weary, impatient finality, as if Erica were a tedious chore she had to complete. "It's time," Chloe said simply. "This isn't working." A bitter laugh, sharp and humorless, escaped Erica's lips. "Isn't working, that's what you call it." She took a step into the room, the air crackling between them. The investigator's report. The bank statements you bled from Mom and Dad, the annotated insurance policy, the mountain road. She listed them like charges, each one a hammer blow. Was that just things not working, Chloe, or was that your business plan? For a moment, Chloe simply stared, her face an unreadable mask. Then, slowly, a chilling detachment settled over her features. The defensiveness, the performative hurt, the brittle anger, all the masks she had worn these past weeks, fell away. What remained was something hollow and stark. She didn't deny it. She didn't flinch or look away. She simply acknowledged. "You saw the report," Chloe stated, her voice unnervingly calm. "Then you know about the debt, the real debt. Not the divorce, the kind that follows you, the kind with men who don't accept apologies as payment." She resumed packing, folding a pair of slacks with meticulous care. "You think I wanted this? You think I enjoyed any of it?" "I think you were planning to kill me," Erica said, the words hanging in the air, brutal and bare. Chloe's hands stilled again. She turned, her gaze meeting Erica's directly. There was no panic in her eyes now, only a frigid, rational light. "It was never personal, Erica. It was arithmetic. A life insurance policy is just a number on a page until someone turns it into liquidity. My life was a sinking ship. That policy was a life raft. I just needed to get to it." The justification, delivered with such chilling detachment, was more monstrous than any shouted confession. Erica felt the room tilt. "Get to it, by shoving me overboard. You had an easy life." The words erupted from Chloe, not as a shout, but as a sharp, hissed truth she had clearly long nurtured. "Your tidy job, your tidy apartment, your tidy little worries. You never had to stare at a ceiling and wonder which would come first. The men breaking your knees or your own decision to jump. You have no idea what real desperation tastes like. It tastes like metal and shame, and it makes every other option look like a gift." She zipped the suitcase closed with a definitive rasp. "I saw a way out, a clean, simple way, an accident, tragic, no one to blame, you'd be a memory and I'd be free. It wasn't about you. It was about survival." Erica listened, her fury congealing into a kind of horrified awe at the sheer, warped logic. The sister she had loved, the architect of pillow forts, had rebuilt herself into this, a creature who could reframe murder as a tragic necessity, who could speak of her sister's death as a clean, simple way. The love, the shared history, the childhood secrets, none of it had mattered. They had been reduced to variables in a brutal equation. "The mountain road," Erica whispered. "That was you checking your work." A faint, almost imperceptible shrug. "A feasibility study. The brakes were fine. I just needed to see the route, your reaction, to visualize it." She said it as if discussing a marketing survey. "But you got suspicious. You started poking. You and your observant nature." She infused the phrase with contempt. "You ruined the elegance of it." The final, brutal truth settled in the space between them. There was no sister left to plead with, to reason with, to save. The person before her was a stranger who saw Erica not as family, but as an obstacle to her financial solvency, a character in a tragedy she was scripting. The emotional confrontation Erica had braced for was not happening. Instead, she was witnessing a clinical debriefing from a morally bankrupt operative. Chloe hefted the suitcase off the bed, its wheels clicking on the hardwood. She walked past Erica, pausing only briefly in the doorway. She didn't look back at the room, at the folded sweater on the nightstand, at the ghost of the sisterhood that had died there. Her gaze was already on the exit, on the next step in her survival. "I loved you once," Erica said, the words a final, broken tribute to a ghost. Chloe stopped, her profile sharp in the hallway light. For a fleeting second, something flickered in her eyes, a shard of memory, a pang of something lost. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, extinguished by the cold, hard need that now defined her. "Love doesn't pay the vig," she said softly, almost to herself. Then she walked. Down the hall, the wheels of her suitcase a steady, retreating drumbeat. The front door opened and closed with a soft, final click. Erica stood alone in the spare room, surrounded by the empty drawers and the faint, lingering scent of her sister's perfume. The brutal reckoning was over. It had not been a battle of wills, but a dissection. Chloe had laid bare the rotten core of her justification and walked away, leaving the carcass of their relationship behind. The sister Erica loved was not just gone. She had been erased, replaced by this calculating, desperate stranger who saw love as a liability and family as a financial instrument. The apartment was silent, profoundly empty. The confrontation had answered every question, and the answers had killed the last living thing between them. All that remained was the hollow, echoing truth, and the long, cold work of learning how to live with it. The silence Chloe left behind was not an absence but a presence, a heavy, sentient thing that filled the apartment with its weight. The click of the front door closing was the period at the end of a sentence written in poison, and in its aftermath, a profound stillness descended, broken only by the frantic, trapped animal rhythm of Erica's own heart. She stood frozen in the center of the spare room, now a crime scene stripped of its perpetrator, the air still vibrating with the echoes of that chilling, detached justification. "Love doesn't pay the vig." The words coiled in the quiet, a serpent of ice around her spine. The confrontation was over, the truth laid bare in its most horrific form, and now the reckoning belonged solely to her. The initial wave was not tears, but a seismic shock of pure, undiluted grief. A grief for the sister who had never truly returned, for the childhood bond now exposed as a naive fantasy, for the future she had imagined rebuilding, now ashes in her mouth. It was a grief so vast and desolate it felt like a physical hollowing, as if Chloe's departure had not just taken her presence, but had scooped out Erica's own insides, leaving a cavern of cold, howling wind. She sank to the floor, her back against the stripped bed, the rough carpet biting into her palms. The room smelled faintly of Chloe's perfume and dust, a sacrilegious blend. She wrapped her arms around her knees, making herself small, as if she could compress the enormity of the betrayal into a manageable shape. It was impossible. The betrayal was the size of the sky, and she was trapped beneath it. Grief, however, was a luxury that quickly curdled into a more volatile substance. Anger. It rose like bile, hot and corrosive, scalding the hollow places grief had carved. Anger at the meticulous deception, at the violation of her home, at the casual appropriation of her favorite sweater, at the terrifying test on the mountain road. Anger at the sheer, breathtaking audacity of being plotted against in her own sanctuary, her life reduced to a line item in a calculation of debt and survival. She wanted to scream, to break things, to tear the neatly folded sheets from the bed and shred them. But the energy never found release. It turned inward, feeding a new, constant companion, paranoia. The apartment, once her haven, became a landscape of latent threat. Every creak of the floorboards was a potential footstep, The hum of the refrigerator was a masked whisper. The sight of Chloe's forgotten hair tie on the bathroom counter sent a jolt of electric fear through her. She changed the locks the next day, the metallic snick of the new deadbolt a feeble comfort. She found herself checking and rechecking windows, peering through the blinds at the empty street below, jumping at the sound of a neighbor's door closing. Sleep became a fractured, elusive thing. In the dark, her mind replayed the mountain drive on a loop, the spongy brake pedal, the sheer drop, Chloe's calm profile. She would jerk awake, heart pounding, convinced the smell of unfamiliar cologne was in the room. Daily life frayed at the edges. At work, her focus, once her sharpest tool, shattered, spreadsheets blurred into meaningless grids. In meetings, her colleagues' voices became a distant murmur as her mind receded into the dark theatre of the past months, analysing every interaction, every lie, for clues she had missed. A request for a report deadline would trigger a cold sweat, timeline acceleration. Her boss's concerned glance felt like scrutiny, a precursor to being deemed a liability. She ate little, the act of cooking in the kitchen where they had shared tense meals now feeling perilous. She ignored calls from friends, their cheerful voicemails feeling like artifacts from a foreign, unreachable country. Isolation became her armor, brittle and suffocating. The realization that she was drowning in the aftermath, that the trauma was not a wave to be ridden but a riptide pulling her under, forced a moment of clarity. She could not navigate this desolation alone. The betrayal was not from a stranger or a lover. It was from her closest familial bond, a violation that struck at the core of her understanding of trust and safety. This required a guide, someone who could translate the unspeakable into manageable pieces. With hands that trembled, she searched for a therapist specializing in trauma and familial betrayal. Making the appointment felt like an admission of profound damage, but also the first, tremulous act of self-preservation. The therapist's office was a neutral space, softly lit, devoid of memories. Sitting in the too comfortable chair, Erica felt like an imposter, her story too grotesque for the calm, abstract art on the walls. But as she began to speak, haltingly at first, then in a torrent, the words, insurance annotations, dry run, VIG, lost some of their spectral power by being aired in the daylight of a stranger's professional listening. The therapist did not flinch. She called it what it was, a profound trauma, a catastrophic breach of attachment. She gave Erica the vocabulary for the chaos inside, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, complex grief. It was not a cure, but a map of the crater she was standing in. The 50-minute hour became an anchor, a weekly tether to a world where her experience was not a shameful secret, but a wound that could eventually be understood if not forgotten. The journey of processing had begun, not with healing, but with the simple, monumental act of acknowledging that the sister she loved was gone, and in her place was a trauma that would forever alter the topography of Erica's life. The pieces were scattered, sharp and countless, but she had taken the first step. She had looked down at the wreckage and decided, despite everything, to try and gather them up. The turning of the seasons, from the brittle heat of summer into the softer, golden light of early autumn, marked not just the passage of time, but the slow, granular work of reconstruction. The therapy sessions became a fixed point in Erica's weeks, a dedicated space where the hurricane of betrayal could be unpacked and examined, piece by jagged piece. The therapist spoke of neural pathways and trauma responses, of rebuilding a sense of safety from the inside out. Erica learned to identify the triggers, the scent of a particular cologne in a crowd, the sound of a suitcase wheel on pavement, a sharp curve on a highway, and to breathe through the ensuing spike of panic. It was not healing, not yet, but it was management. She was learning to live alongside the wound, to keep it from poisoning every moment. Strength, when it began to return, did not arrive as a dramatic surge, but as a series of small, deliberate choices. It appeared in the form of her small, steadfast circle of friends. After weeks of isolation, she forced herself to answer a text from Maya, her college roommate. Their meeting for coffee was awkward at first, Erica's laughter brittle, her silences heavy. But Maya, perceptive and kind, did not press. She simply listened, her presence a quiet antidote to the echoing solitude of the apartment. Slowly, Erica began to accept other invitations, a subdued movie night, a walk along the beach at sunset. These friends asked no probing questions about Chloe. They simply enveloped her in the mundane, healing rhythm of normalcy. Their loyalty became a new kind of foundation, one built on chosen affinity rather than the accident of blood. The relationship with her parents evolved into something cautious, tender, and forever altered. The shared devastation had created a bond of survivors, but it was fraught with guilt, and a mutual unspoken grief for the daughter they had lost. Conversations were careful, orbiting the absent center of their family. They met for quiet dinners, the spectre of Chloe hovering just beyond the lamplight. There were no more large withdrawals from savings, only a new painful frugality and a lingering fear of the phone ringing. Yet in their careful hugs and their over-attentive concern for Erica's well-being, she saw their love scarred but persistent. They were all picking up their own pieces, separately yet in parallel, respecting the vast minefield that now lay between them. Erica made her physical world a fortress. She hired a locksmith to install a heavy-duty deadbolt and a chain on her door, the solid thunk of the new mechanism a nightly ritual of security. She changed every password, for her email, her bank accounts, every streaming service and social media profile, creating complex, unique codes she stored in a physical notebook, a tiny act of reclamation. She went through the apartment with a methodical ruthlessness, removing every trace of Chloe's occupancy. The forgotten hair tie was thrown away. The spare room was repainted a serene, cool grey, the bed donated, the space transformed into a reading nook with a comfortable chair, and a bookshelf filled only with stories that belonged to her. Each act was a reassertion of boundary, a message to herself that this space was hers alone, its sanctity non-negotiable. The story closed on a Thursday evening. Erica stood at the window of her quiet apartment, a cup of tea warming her hands. The city below was a tapestry of twinkling lights, each one a separate life, a separate story of joy and sorrow. She reflected on the meaning of family and trust, concepts forever altered. Family was no longer an immutable sanctuary. It was a potential landscape, one that could nurture or betray, and its bonds required discernment, not blind faith. Trust was no longer a blanket to be offered freely, but a precious, fragile currency, earned in increments and always subject to revocation. The naive woman who had opened her door to a sister in need was gone, shed like a skin. She was alone, but the aloneness no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like integrity. The peace she felt was not the blissful ignorance of before, but a hard-won stillness, born of vigilance and self-preservation. She was at peace but forever wary, a sentinel in her own life. The love for the sister of her childhood would always be a scar, a tender place of mourning for what was and what could never be again. But the woman who had plotted in the spare room was a stranger, and from strangers one could walk away. Erica turned from the window, the soft light of her own lamp welcoming her back into the room. The pieces were gathered, not into the old, shattered vase, but arranged into a new, different mosaic. It was fragile, and the shadows at its edges were deep, but it was hers. She sat in her chair, picked up her book, and began to read, the quiet of the apartment a shelter, not a prison. The forward motion was minute, almost imperceptible, but it was motion nonetheless. She was finally moving. The cold, procedural light of the law office felt like an antiseptic wash over the raw, emotional wound of the past months. Erica sat between her parents in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and old paper, the vast mahogany table a polished moat separating them from the lawyer, a woman named Helen Vance, no relation. She had assured them with a thin, professional smile, whose demeanor was as crisp as her tailored suit. This was the next necessary step, translating the visceral horror of betrayal into the sterile language of statutes and injunctions. The hope, however faint, was that the legal system could impose an order, a finality, that their shattered emotions could not. Helen listened without visible reaction as they laid out the chronology, her pen scratching notes on a yellow legal pad. Erica spoke of the annotated insurance policy, her voice flat. Her father produced the investigator's report. Her mother, her hands clasped tightly, mentioned the drained savings. They spoke of the mountain road, the dry run. The words, which had felt so monstrous in the living room, seemed to shrink and desiccate in this room, becoming mere data points in a potential case file. When they finished, Helen set her pen down precisely. She steepled her fingers, her gaze moving between their exhausted faces. "What you've described is profoundly disturbing," she began, her tone measured. "Morally, it is damning. Legally, however, it is complex." She explained the chasm between suspicion and proof. The annotated policy showed morbid curiosity, not criminal intent. The investigators' report detailed association and desperation, not a specific, actionable conspiracy. The mountain road incident was a he said, she said account of a drive with faulty brakes. No evidence of tampering, no witnesses, no confession to that specific act. Chloe's cold justification during the final confrontation was not recorded. Without a direct, documented threat, or evidence of an overt act toward causing harm, criminal charges, for attempted murder or conspiracy would be very difficult to pursue. The burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. A clever defense attorney would argue financial anxiety, poor judgment, and hyperbolic family conflict. Erica felt the hope, which she hadn't even realized she was clinging to, curdle into a hard lump of frustration. The law could see the blueprint, smell the smoke, but could not acknowledge the fire without seeing the flames. The system was designed for concrete acts, not the terrifying architecture of intention she had lived inside. So she just walks away, her father asked, his voice thick with a helpless anger. Not entirely, Helen said, opening a folder. What we can do is build a wall. A restraining order is highly achievable. Given the documented financial predation, the investigators' conclusions about a high-risk situation, and the history of cohabitation ending in acrimony, a court will likely grant a permanent order prohibiting contact, harassment, or proximity. It creates a legal consequence for any future approach. She then slid 2 documents across the table, updated last wills and testaments for Erica's parents. The language was stark, unambiguous. In the section detailing bequests, Chloe Adams was formally named and explicitly disinherited. $1 and no more, the clause read, a classic legal formulation to prevent claims of being accidentally omitted. The rest of their estate was directed solely to Erica, held in a trust with specific conditions. Similarly, Helen presented a new will for Erica herself, leaving everything to her parents or, contingent on their passing, to name charities. Chloe was not mentioned. The absence of her name was more powerful than any accusation. Signing the documents was a cold, silent ritual. The scratch of pens on paper was the only sound. Erica watched her father's hand, usually so steady, tremble slightly as he initialed each page. Her mother cried quietly, tears dripping onto the table as she signed away her firstborn daughter. Erica felt nothing but a hollow chill. This was not an emotional decision, it was a surgical one. They were legally excising a malignancy, amending the family tree with ink and witness signatures. The steps that followed were equally procedural. Helen filed the restraining order petition, citing the evidence they had. A court date was set, but Helen assured them Chloe, advised by any competent attorney, would likely not contest it, avoiding a formal hearing that would air the investigators' findings. They would receive a certified copy of the order, a piece of paper that was meant to be a shield. Walking out of the cool, quiet office into the glaring afternoon sun felt like stepping between dimensions. The legal steps were clean, logical, and final, yet they made the betrayal feel more profound, not less. It had been reduced to paperwork, to clauses and orders. The sister who had shared her childhood bed, who had known the secret language of their family, was now a named party in a restraining order and a grammatical omission in a will. The cold finality of the law did not bring solace. It simply made the loss official, a matter of public record. The emotional chasm was now mirrored by a legal one, and the distance between Erica and the ghost of her sister was measured not in miles or memories, but in the precise, unforgiving language of the law. The process was over, the wall was built, and on their side of it the air was clear, safe, and bitterly, terminally cold. The new apartment in Los Feliz was a clean, bright box on the 3rd floor, with windows that framed a slice of the Hollywood Hills and none of the sightlines that led toward her old neighborhood. Erica had chosen it for its anonymity and its light. The walls were bare except for a single abstract print in muted blues, a color the therapist had called calming. A year had passed since the legal formalities, the signed wills and the restraining order that sat in her filing cabinet like a geological record of a cataclysm. The sharp, jagged edges of the trauma had softened, worn down by the steady, patient work of therapy and the deliberate architecture of her new life. The grief was no longer a drowning pool, but a familiar, quiet companion, a scar tissue that ached in certain weather. Her Tuesday evening session had ended an hour ago. Dr. Rosen had guided her through another examination of boundaries, of the difference between healthy caution and corrosive paranoia. They had discussed the upcoming anniversary of Chloe's departure, not as a looming spectre, but as a date on a calendar, a marker of survival. Erica left the office feeling balanced, grounded in the present tense of her own existence. She stopped at the market below her building, selecting a ripe avocado and a bundle of asparagus, small rituals of self-care that felt like victories. The elevator ride-up was silent. Her keys, on a new ring with no sentimental charms, jingled a familiar, safe song. The mail lay in a neat stack on the floor just inside her door. A utility bill, a catalogue, a postcard from a friend travelling in Italy, and one standard white envelope, her name and address printed in a handwriting that stopped the breath in her lungs. It was not the looping, artistic script of Chloe's youth, but a tighter, more angular print. The postmark was smudged but readable: Albuquerque, New Mexico, no return address. Erica stood in the entryway, the grocery bag dangling from her hand. The calm from her session receded like a tide, leaving the familiar cold sand of adrenaline on her skin. A year of silence, broken by a rectangle of paper. The restraining order was a legal fiction, a piece of parchment that could not stop a stamp. She placed the bag on the kitchen counter, her movements slow and deliberate. She picked up the envelope. It was light, a single sheet inside. She carried it to the sink, as if its mere presence required a containment field. With a butter knife from the drying rack, she slit the top. The paper inside was cheap, lined notebook paper, torn raggedly from a spiral binding. The handwriting was the same as the envelope, but messier, the lines slanting and crowded, words crammed into margins. She unfolded it and began to read. It was not an apology. It was a ramble, a stream of consciousness etched in ink. It spoke of pressures you couldn't fathom and choices made in dark rooms. It mentioned Albuquerque offhandedly, a dry heat, a waitressing job that paid cash. There were veiled references to that man being gone, his promises empty as a drum. The tone veered between self-pity and a strange, defensive justification. You always saw things in black and white, one line accused. The world is built in greys, in debts that come due. Another paragraph lamented the loss of the only family I had left, but the sentiment felt performative, a line read from a script of expected remorse. It ended abruptly. I don't expect a reply, don't know why I'm writing. Maybe just to say I'm still here. Erica read it once, her eyes moving mechanically from line to line. She felt no surge of anger, no fresh wound of grief. Instead, she felt a profound, weary distance, as if observing a specimen behind glass. The letter was a fossil, evidence of a creature whose ecosystem was desperation and self-justification. It contained no request, no threat, no genuine seeking of absolution. It was a message in a bottle from a ship that had sailed into a sea she no longer charted. It was the last, frayed thread. She looked from the paper to her clean, stainless steel sink. Without ceremony, she twisted the knob for the gas burner on her stovetop. A blue flame hissed to life, a tiny, perfect cone of heat. She held the corner of the letter to the fire. The cheap paper caught quickly, the flame blooming orange and hungry, racing up the margin, consuming the cramped words about debts and greys and empty drums. The heat kissed her fingertips. She let go, and the burning sheet fluttered down into the white porcelain basin. She watched it curl in on itself, blacken, dissolve into fragile, weightless ash. The flame died, leaving a small, smoky ghost that dissipated into the air above the sink. A faint, acrid scent lingered, then faded. Erica turned on the tap. A clear stream of water washed over the ashes, swirling them into a grey slurry that vanished down the drain. She ran the water until the sink was pristine again. Then she turned it off. The silence returned, deeper now. The last thread was gone, not with a tear but with a quiet, deliberate dissolution. The letter had been a test, perhaps unconscious, of whether the old hook still held. By burning it, she had given her answer. The new normal was not the absence of the past, but the conscious, daily choice not to let its embers reignite. She turned back to her groceries, to the avocado and the asparagus, to the evening ahead in her clean, well-lit apartment. The past was ash and running water. The present was hers, and it was enough.